Hi everybody, welcome back to the channel, Stu Clark. Today we're going to continue talking about shooting banks and how I've got them set up for my Nikon Z8. If you watched the previous video, we talked about getting shooting bank B and just an overall kind of overview of the shooting banks. And today I want to talk about, we're going to kind of take a deep dive into shooting bank C, which is my wildlife photography and videography shooting bank. Shooting banks, as we talked about in the last video, is really important. If you're going to utilize them correctly, you really have to adopt them into all of your shooting style. I've got mine set up for subject and then also the settings, the environment that they're going to be in. Basically, I'm going to switch between banks based on birds in an open environment, birds in the forest, wildlife, and then landscape. And they're going to be the four, my basic categories of photography. Now with shooting banks, I have had a lot of requests to whether or not I can make these downloadable or not. For now, I'm just going to only have them option where you can download the settings as opposed to actually download the file and just plug it right into your camera. I haven't gone that route for a couple of reasons. One, I don't want to have it where you don't realize that it overrides all four shooting banks and you have it where it ends up completely changing your camera from where you had it set up. And I don't want people coming at me complaining about that and how to kind of get their camera back to the reset to where it was. But also I think it's really important with a camera like this to take some control of it yourself. I have a link down below for my website where I'll have shooting bank C set up there today. So I've got A, B, and C up there right now. You can print out these forms and you can go through and set your camera up accordingly. And the idea behind this is that you actually get more than just plug it in, download it, and away you go. I think if you change something you don't like, you might not know where to find it. And by going through systematically and changing things, hopefully you'll kind of get a better understanding of where these changes are happening. And not only that, I've got very tight parameters for what I need each shooting bank to do. And there's actually quite minimal changes between each of them. And this is intentional because, birds in the open environment and birds in the forest, as much as your bird is your main subject, there are some changes that fundamentally change the performance of the camera for me that make it much quicker. And it's like I said, with that cycle area F, I only want 3 things. I don't want 6 things. You might find that 6 things is just fine for your style of photography, that you want to have one of those shooting banks open for something else. And for myself, that's not the case. I want to make it so that in each of my banks, the camera performs as well as it can. So I said I'd only said birds are going to be 80% of what I shoot. Wildlife is going to be another 18%, and I do some landscape and I do some real estate photography. The landscape, real estate, and also macro work really well in the shooting bank D, and they'll be talking about that in the next video. One thing I don't think I've made quite clear enough in the other videos, and again, this comes back to having the downloadable option, is I shoot with F-mount adapted glass at the moment. I don't shoot with Z lenses. I'm not able to take advantage of some of the custom function buttons on the lenses. And you'll notice that in the setup, they're basically left at default. And one of those big ones is the new focus limiter. I see that having some great uses in the field for setup photography, things like that. I can see it being absolutely amazing. Once I get my hands on a Z lens to try, I'll definitely be kind of updating these accordingly. And I could see using one of the function buttons on the camera for that focus limiter to engage that. So that's something you definitely want to consider if you are shooting on Z lens. It's something to really think about. So I think a great way to give some explanation behind the banks with shooting bank C, what we're going to take a look at what I have changed compared to my shooting bank B. And this will give you an idea of some of the decision-making process behind it. So we won't go through everything. We're just going to look at the things I've changed specifically for the wildlife. And I think this is a really important practice because, like I said, your shooting needs are going to vary from mine. I'm very wildlife specific. A lot of people might go out and shoot some sports. They might shoot weddings on the weekends, and they're going to have obviously different needs than I do. So by giving you some ideas here about what I've changed, it'll hopefully kind of get the gears going with you that, okay, if you want to set up your own shooting bank A for birds, you might want to combine that with wildlife where you just change the subject detect on A and make it both birds and wildlife so that your shooting bank C is open for something else. Hopefully I can give you some ideas here about the changes I've made, where I've made them, and that'll hopefully give you some ideas for as you're trying to kind of set your camera up for you to kind of give you a bit of more insight into my thinking behind setting it up. The first changes when we're looking at it, we're going to be at the photo shooting menu at the top here. And this one is, in practice, how much does it make difference? That's a tough one to tell. I haven't really gone through and done a really deep dive comparing one shot to the next. But basically what I've done in the wildlife settings, I've switched to lossless compressed from the high efficiency star. So the high efficiency star is an amazing raw format. This is for photos and it's great. Never buffers out with a fast CF Express card. The file sizes, I believe, they're about half the size of the lossless compressed. So with birds, you've got a lot of rapid fire shooting. A warbler flies in, you're going to be 20 frames per second for, 2, 3, 4 seconds at a time. That bird comes in, bring off a bunch of shots, bird flies away. So you're gonna end up with a lot of photos hoping for that head turn, the look, all those different things. Quite a bit different than photographing elk, photographing bears, for example, where you've got a herd of elk. It's gonna be a slower pace. So you're not gonna be getting as many shots through the course of a day than if you're photographing birds where it's 20 frames per second and you're just gonna be cranking off the shots. You'll definitely be shooting a higher frame rate when they start sparring, things like that. But one of the things with the lossless compressed versus high efficiency star, it will give you a little bit more editability. And the reason behind this is a lot of wildlife photos, they're going to be a grander image than birds. Birds are going to be more of a portrait, a little bit tighter, a little bit closer, depending on the shot, where wildlife is far more likely to be an animal-scape. Basically, it's a landscape photo with this wildlife subject in the foreground. So the idea behind having it with the lossless compressed, you're basically taking it where you're using the landscape settings, the top quality possible, because these are also images that you might want to print really big. An image of a warbler, as amazing as it's going to be, you're probably not going to print it to a wall size, just based on the subject matter. But an animalscape, mountain backdrop, bear on the beach, that sort of thing, yeah, you know what? That's definitely a wall size print. So taking advantage of the highest quality images camera can take makes sense. And that's why I picked lossless compressed here. So for ISO sensitivity settings, as always, I'm going to be in auto ISO here. We have bumped the maximum sensitivity up to high 1. The reason we allow the camera to go to high 1 for maximum sensitivity is that software is better at recovering a noisy photo than it is a blurry photo. So having the shutter speed needed is more important than trying to reduce noise in this situation. So we'll let that run as high as needed in order to capture the shot. So we go down to AF area mode in photo shooting menu. And this is where the C2 is what I generally use, C2. And if you, with all the settings we've talked about on the download, we're going to be using C2 for this setting. So this one, we've gone to 19:7. And the reason by 19:7, if you take a look at the elk here, so the 19:7, where I like the 19:7 box is you can avoid the auto area being in front. It allows you where you can put the box up high. So see the way I put the box a little bit higher there, and it goes up to the head of the elk there. And it does give you a bit more options and kind of eliminating any distractions in the foreground. And then also you can see as the elk is moving his head up and down, this box is large enough to keep it over your subject. It allows you to isolate between each animal as well. And you can move it around, but you can kind of basically keeping it, a lot of times you're going to have that foreground. So by having this box where you can basically just keep it off of the foreground, it really helps. So this is a great one here. You can see how by having that box, any head movement will be within the frame of that box. It's large enough you can keep it on the subject no problem. And it really works for wildlife, and just say eliminating that foreground is really nice. And we're switching the subject detection to animal here from bird. And everything else will be the same as on the bird photo shooting menus. Now with video recording with wildlife, I'll typically start at either 8K 60 or 4K 60. That 60 frames per second is really nice with wildlife. With birds, 120 frames per second seems to work better for slow motion. It gives you a little bit extra adjustability on the slow motion side of it, because birds can be a very quick, they fly in, fly out. You can end up with like a 2-second clip where you can then stretch it out to 8 or 10 seconds depending on the frame rate of your timeline. With wildlife, the motion is a little bit slower. Unless you're dealing with, a black bear chasing a salmon or grizzly chasing a salmon down a river, then you can definitely take advantage of that 120 frames per second. But even still, the 60 frames I find to be a really nice frame rate for most wildlife situations. Elk sparring, things like that. That 60 frames per second works really well when you drop it down onto a 30 frames per second timeline or a 24 frames per second timeline. You get, a 2 or 2.5 times slow motion. So it works really, really well for that. So in video mode, again, we're going to be shooting in NRAW. The frame size, frame rate, like I say, that 8K 60, 4K 60. And again, depending on how far your subject is away from you, that 5.4K 60 works really well as well. If the elk were bugling, definitely you could drop it down to 30 frames per second, even 24 frames per second. As the light gets low, dropping to a lower frame rate, you can end up with just lowering that noise. You're basically effectively dropping the ISO down by a full stop for every, going from 60 to 30. That's a full stop of ISO that you're dropping. So something to really keep in mind. As the light gets lower, you can definitely lower that frame rate, and that'll really help to keep the noise level a little bit down as well. Video quality and RAW, I generally shoot in normal just to keep the file sizes reasonable. And this one, I've gone to 17 by 7. It does give you a little bit tighter frame on your subject. So it does give you a little bit more options for kind of isolating a single subject. Again, with all of this, I will be shooting with cycle area AF with single mode, where I can just put the right over top of the head of my subject, just in order to kind of dial it in. In this instance here, we've got the elk, his head kind of hiding behind himself. If you found that you have two different elk in the scene and it wants to kind of go to the wrong elk, going to single mode is really nice to kind of put it on the head you need. And this one is, say, oh, it's not perfectly on the eye. Reality of it is, at this distance, these elk were actually a good long ways away. I believe these were shot in a bit of a crop mode, some of these. And you're dealing with quite a bit of distance on these animals that they're generally going to be, the depth of field will be quite large at this distance anyway. So you shouldn't be too bad if it's if it's on the body versus right on the eye, it'll still be in focus for video at this distance. So in the ISO sensitivity settings, for wildlife, I'm going to let it run all the way up to 20,000 ISO. The video quality will suffer at that point. But because of wildlife, you're going to be low light. You're going to be shooting in situations where I'd rather get the shot than not. So I'm going to let the ISO ride really high in auto ISO for video. Just in case, something pops out of the woods just right at dark, you can still hopefully get some video of it. So now we'll take a look at some of the focus settings. So the focus tracking with lock on is definitely, I have changed that up from birds. So with the bird settings, I use erratic typically. So erratic means that you've got a subject that is moving around. It's flying. Imagine a swallow or a bat that's dipping and diving as it's flying. That's going to be an erratic movement. So for birds, I do find I like the erratic lock on for the tracking. I find that works really well. but wildlife's going to generally be a much more steadier. It's going to be running, it's going to be moving, it's going to be less variance in the movement of the subject, unless you're trying to photograph a squirrel or something like that. But in that situation, so I like steady, and I've gone and I've switched it to 4 for the lock on, just because you might have grasses, things like that, and that it might get pulled off on, and it's easy, a little bit less sticky. You can get it off to get it back to your subject when necessary. Now in controls, the recall shooting function hold is definitely something, as if you've watched the last video, you can see how I made it go from birds to animals. Here with wildlife, generally a bird encounter in this situation is most likely going to be a flyover, an eagle flying over, a hawk flying over. So I basically set up where the recall shooting function hold changes the camera over to bird detect with bird in flight settings. So what we've done here is we've gone to 1/1000th of a shutter speed, which is generally fast enough to freeze most things at some level with kind of managing that ISO, and you can adjust the speed if necessary on the fly as well. Aperture, I've set it at 2.8, and this basically means that it will shoot wide open. In those situations, I'm going to want it wide open just to kind of get the lowest aperture possible in that scenario. ISO sensitivity, we're going to be auto ISO on. With the ISO sensitivity of 64, what that means is that it will go as low as possible at 1/1000th of a second. So that's basically all I'm doing it there. I'm just telling you, set the ISO as low as possible, but then with the auto ISO sensitivity control, it will go as high as it needs to maintain that 1/1000th of a second. Metering is going to be matrix metering, so I don't have to check that. I use matrix metering for all of my bird and wildlife settings. White balance, same again. AF area mode, so this one I'm going to use C1, and the C1 setting, basically what we did with C1, show you here. So C1 for birds in flight, we've gone to 15:7, which still a good sized box, but it is nice and easy to kind of keep over a flying bird. So it works really well for that. And then, of course, subject detect. We've now gone to bird subject detect. And then focus with lock on. We've gone to the block shot AF of 5, and then we've gone to subject detect of erratic to hopefully keep that AF point locked on the subject. And then finally, the last change we've made on here is D14. So D14 is one I've made a video on this. I'll leave a link down below. We discussed this, but D14 is an interesting, it's called the release timing indicator. And what this allows you to do is it allows you to change up how the camera reacts when it goes below a certain shutter speed. So because there's no shutter on this camera, there's no audible tone for when you get below a certain shutter speed. So back in the DSLR days, as soon as you get below 1/60th of a second, you really start to hear the shutter. You start to hear the clunking. You get down to 1/30th, 1/20th, photographing owls, and it's like chunk, tunk, chunk, tunk. And you really start to hear it. So you know that you can't handhold it anymore. You need to be, either need to bump your ISO up so you can audibly tell when you're getting into the danger zone of motion blur between you or your subject. So with this release timing indicator allows the camera to give you an audible shutter noise it'll change from that really quick shutter speed where, when you're shooting at 20 frames per second, to now it starts to make more of a stutter in there. You can tell that you're getting to the danger zone. Birds in the forest, I have it set to 1/30th a second because a lot of times photographing owls, that's going to be where I need to know that, hey, I need to kind of change the ISO a little bit here because the shutter speed's getting in a danger zone. With wildlife, it's actually a little bit higher. Birds are funny in that birds are a little more mechanical. So birds tend to stop, turn, and they tend to stop as you shoot. You'll have moments of where you can freeze them. Smaller birds are a little bit more jumpy than that, so you need to be something a little bit faster there. But with wildlife, I find a bear, 1/250th is kind of the ideal minimum shutter speed. So 1/250th a second, 80% of the shots will be sharp. At 1/125th a second, you might be down to 30% of the shots are sharp. So it's quite just because bears or wildlife tends to be a lot more fluid in its movements. in a constant motion. Obviously, the elk in the footage here, they're just kind of sitting still. That would be a situation. Sure, you can go a lot lower shutter speeds to try and get those portrait shots. But even still, they might be chewing. You might get some motion in the face of the animal. So what we've done here is with this, because I like that, because that 1/125th I find is where I find that the subject is the issue. There's nothing to do with camera on a tripod. None of that matters. This is about the movement of the subject. I've got it where at 1/125th of a second, the camera starts to tell me that the shutter noise will change, so that I know to bump the shutter speed up a little bit because it's starting to get into that danger zone. So this is something that you might not have noticed it when you're doing the setup, but this is why I've done that. And it's a really neat feature that's definitely worth taking advantage of on these cameras. And then finally, let's talk about, and I didn't mention it in the last video, but what are my minimum shutter speeds? What shutter speed do I go out the door? What aperture do I go out the door set in the camera? I'm going to be shooting auto ISO for wildlife and for birds. That's kind of my go-to on this camera. With Lightroom's denoise, I'm happy shooting this camera up to about 10,000 ISO. Anything beyond there, I'm not, not ideal, but if you need it, you need it. So with birds at the estuary, typically 1/1250th of a second, 1/1600th of a second, kind of a good starting shutter speed. And that'll capture most everything. If you're going out specializing, trying to get osprey diving, obviously you're going to be 1/3200th to 1/6400th of a second. You need to kind of go to much faster shutter speed. But generally going out the door, going to estuary, I'm going to be 1/1600th of a second. Is a nice, safe place to be. With this camera, I typically shoot it at 5.6 wide open. I might stop down to 6.3. Might go out the door for my shooting bank A. Shooting bank B, birds in the forest, I'm going to be happy at about 1/500th of a second. If birds are singing, wrens singing, stuff like that, maybe 1/640th, maybe 1/800th, a little bit more shutter speed. But I find 1/500th in that in-tight environment is typically going to be the shutter speed of 80%, where 80% of the shots are going to be sharp based on shutter speed alone. Again, this one, because I'm going to be a lot closer to the subject, depending on how bright the day is, a nice bright overcast day, I'll definitely shooting about f8. But as it gets later in the day, I'll happily open it up to f5.6 with this lens. I'm very happy with that. 6.3 if you need a little bit more depth of field for your subject, but that's going to be going out the door. With wildlife, again, I'm going to probably 1/500th is going to be my go-to walking down the trail for when I've got wildlife in mind. And that will generally be a shutter speed that will freeze, again, 80% of the subject. And a lot of times initially with wildlife, you're going to have an initial moment where cougar pops his head around the tree, or bear pops his head around. You're going to have a moment of freezing. And that 1/500th is sharp enough, whether you're excited, it's going to be sharp enough to freeze any of your motion and sharp enough to freeze the minimal subject motion you're going to get at the moment. If it starts to run away, things like that, obviously 1/500th is not going to be fast enough for that. But often it'll be running into the woods, trees, anywhere. You're going to lose it anyway. So I find 1/500th is kind of my go out the door for wildlife. If I'm going down to the river, bears chasing salmon, stuff like that, 1/1000th, 1/1600th would probably be a little more ideal to freeze that sort of action, but still maintain as low a ISO as possible. You don't need to go to 1/6400th of a second in those situations. Like I say, 1/1000th, 1/1250th, 1/1600th is typically going to be fast enough to freeze in those situations. And again, anywhere from f5.6 to f8, depending on how bright a day it is, how much your ISO is creeping up. You need to open the aperture up a little bit to kind of keep you under that, that 8,000, 10,000 limit ideally. And then finally, let's take a look at how you can save the settings for shooting banks. So if you've come from Z6, the mid-range Nikon cameras, they have a user 1, user 2. And user 1, user 2, when you set up the camera, you then go and hit save, and it saves those settings. So you can go out, shoot for the day, go home, turn the camera off. Next time you go out, you change back to that user 1 setting. It is how you set it up. It's really nice and simple. Shooting banks are different than that in that they don't have an in-camera save. Kind of wish they did, but they will wander as you've made changes through the day. So what that means is that when you've set the camera up, so you've gone through and you've downloaded all the settings I've got, and you've gone through and you've set your whole camera up, you go out, you're shooting bank A, a bear runs in front of you, go and you change this, you go into the menus and change your subject to animal. Shooting bank A, the next time you go out, will be set at animal, not at birds. And that's why you want to make sure that you use the banks as opposed to doing the changes in the field. However, you can back up these menus. So how you go about that is you want to find, if you have got an old SD card around, that's going to be the best way to do it, to find an old SD card. Make sure you format it in camera. Remove the CF Express card from the camera so you just have the SD card in there. Okay, so we're going to go down to the setup menu, and we're going to scroll to the bottom here. Third thing from the bottom is save or load menu settings. So what we're going to do here, and this is why, if you have the CF Express card in the camera, it will save your settings to the CF Express card. You format the card, the settings are gone. That's why it has to be on an old SD card ideally. So you've got the SD card in here, you've got the CF Express card removed. You hit save menu settings. It will save all of your custom shooting banks. Everything will be saved to that SD card. Write it on the card settings, put it in your memory card case. Then you know that you go out, you've been shooting, you've been tired, and you ended up making a bunch of changes unexpectedly, especially over the coming weeks here when you're just getting used to using the shooting banks. You can put that SD card back in and then go load menu settings, and it will reset the camera back to the settings that you've set up. So that's a great way to kind of maintain the settings. Like I said, if they've wandered over time and you went out and you've made a bunch of changes you weren't really expecting and you forgot to set them back and you kind of got a little bit lost and things have just wandered from what you originally set up, that is how you can go about resetting them. So I hope that gives you some insight into my thinking of how I've gone through and set up the camera and how I've set up these shooting banks for wildlife. Like I say, for me, there's very, very small changes between the shooting banks, but are fundamental to how the camera works within each bank for the subject for me. In the next video, we'll have a look and we'll kind of have a walk through the landscape, macro, real estate bank. This is one where there's a lot of changes in this bank. This is a completely different shooting style in this bank. And it's also one where it's going to be slower shooting all around. So it's one that you have a little bit more time to think about. If things are different, you can change them around a little bit more. Where the shooting A, B, and C are very much set up for the moment. Fast subject, credible. You're setting it with a very dynamic subject. So you set the camera up for the day walking out the door, and it's a way to really kind of you really think about how you want that camera set up and how you can help it utilize it for yourself. So I'll have links down below to my website. I've got A, B, and C set up there right now. You can download them, you can print them. If these settings help you out, you can definitely leave me a super thanks tip here on YouTube. I'd hugely appreciate that. Right now I'm trying to get right now I utilize my laptop for recording through the screen. I'm trying to get trying to save up for one of the Blackmagic field monitors that records so that I can get out in the field and do a lot of these talks more in the moment in the field where I could still record through the viewfinder. I watch a lot of landscape YouTube channels, Photo Tripper, Adam Gibbs and the like, and they always use a camera to photograph the back screen when they're in the field. Problem with wildlife, it's far too dynamic to do that. You don't get let's talk about the scene, and I can record the back of the camera to show you what I'm trying to do. With wildlife, you need to have a recorder that's on camera and active. So if you want to help me get that so we can get out in the field and give you some really step-by-step instructions in the field, I'd really appreciate that. And yeah, till next time, we'll see you out there. Take care.